Hello and welcome to Original Soundchat, where video game music is a work of art. On each episode, it's our goal to help you learn about 2 soundtracks from the world of games, as well as the people, stories, and critical tracks behind them. My name is DeVader.
And I'm Peter Spezia. We're brought to you by Anonymous Dinosaur and Rhymes with Asia. It's time to appreciate great OSTs and the games that they come from, without getting too bogged down in music theory. Joe, what are this week's games?
Up first is 2015's Fire Emblem FATES, the massive 3-route entry into Nintendo's strategy RPG series that makes the player choose between 2 kingdoms and 2 families.
Following that is the sequel to Naughty Dog's bleak post-apocalyptic classic, which dives further into the cycle of violence and what happens when revenge goes too far. 2020's The Last of Us Part 2. They say that there are 2 sides to every story, but I think that is especially true with these games this week, both picked for different reasons for things that are coming out shortly, but you know what? I think it's a good theme to tie these 2 experiences together.
Yeah, I think this, I was wondering why, first of all, I'd forgotten about that release, and second of all, some might be thinking like it would make more sense if we did Fire Emblem next week, but we're doing something else next week. And in our hearts, that takes a higher priority. But I wanted to do a Fire Emblem game because Fire Emblem Engage comes out next week. And we've gotten a lot of traction. Matt actually did the preview over at NWR, and it has made the rounds. It is showing up everywhere. Including Serenus Forest. I've never heard it pronounced out loud, but the big Fire Emblem fan site, basically the Cerebi of Fire Emblem, has been using his preview and information and all that for a lot of stuff. It's really neat to see, and according to Matt, the game is very good, so I'm very excited.
Yeah, he did a great job with the preview. Looking forward to his full review, and it's interesting to hear just overall his impressions of it. And it seems like a good way to start the year, not only on a game front, but on a soundtrack front as well. So already starting to think of best of 2023, even though we're in January. Joe, how are you doing? What are you playing?
So I have been playing more of Persona 2 Eternal Punishment, which, fun fact, is living up to its name. Because they made it has the same problem that you see between 3 and 4, where I assume Japanese people complained that Innocent Sin was too easy, and Atlas hard overcorrected. Something they also do between 3 and 4. So it's much harder, but it also has a problem of just, I don't like the cast as much, and I don't like the story as much so far. And I'm not super far into it. I'm not even halfway, but so far it hasn't grabbed me as hard as Innocent Sin did. And I've been told that Innocent Sin is generally considered to be the better game in the pair. But I guess we'll see as I get further. But yeah, I mean, so far I don't hate it, but it's just not grabbing me.
Well, they can't all be winners as you continue to play more and more of that franchise, building up to more releases later this month. I have been playing some more God of War Ragnarok, actually. Just decided to dip back in for some of the post-game, continue the side quest content. Those who have played it know that there's a big part of Vanaheim that opens up right near the end of the game, where you probably could go to the end game, but you could also stay and explore this big open world area that opens up that could almost be a game in itself. So just kind of messing around doing some side quests there, killing some dragons and whatnot. Good stuff there. And I need to play more Kirby and the Forgotten Land, because that's itching and need to cycle that out on the rental. But I'm looking forward to getting to that, because I only hear great things, as I had a really positive first hour or two with this, so more to play. We don't have really any composer follow-up news this week. We're still early in the year, waiting for a Nintendo Direct or some big news event to happen. So let's get into talking about some video games and their music.
Yeah, baby, let's talk about Fire Emblem. Specifically, let's talk about probably one of the most divisive Fire Emblem games to come out ever. This is Fire Emblem Fates. Now, technically, Fire Emblem Fates is, if you think about it, 3 entire games released for the 3DS, except they're not, but also they are. But it's weird. They are made up of 3 quote-unquote segments, 3 routes, being Birthright, Conquest, and Revelation. And these games, of course, were released as Fire Emblem If in Japan, which I kinda like that title a little bit better, but I can see why they didn't keep it. So Birthright and Conquest released on June 25th, 2015 in Japan, and Revelation released later that year on July 9th. North America got Birthright and Conquest on February 19th, 2016, and Revelation on March 10th. And then Europe and Australia got Birthright and Conquest in May, and Revelation in June of 2016. It was developed by Intelligent Systems and published by Nintendo. It is the second 3DS entry of the 3 for Nintendo's strategy RPG series. We've talked about 2 Fire Emblem games on this show, which happened to be the game immediately before this, and the game immediately, well, not immediately after, I guess 2 games after. I keep forgetting that Shadows of Valentia came out after Fates.
You and me both. It's Fire Emblem Echoes. It's a spin-off, I guess, remake.
Yeah, it came out after Fates, and I keep forgetting about that. But one day we will talk about ones that came out before the 3DS, I promise. Don't worry, it'll happen. Probably. And those games, of course, the ones we've talked about being Fire Emblem Awakening, back on episode 26, and 3 Houses in episode 150. These play pretty much exactly like all the other games in the Fire Emblem series. Usually, Fire Emblem is jokingly described as more complicated anime chess. Not 100% accurate, but accurate enough that I'll use it. Battles take place on a grid. Player can move their units a certain amount of spaces depending on that unit's stats, and they can use those units to attack enemy units or heal their own units, among other abilities. If you are playing on the classic mode in the game, which you have that and casual, just like you have in Awakening and in 3 Houses and all that, if a unit dies, they're dead, and they don't come back, which is a staple of the Fire Emblem franchise, but has been made optional in later games, which I think was a great idea. And units can also be paired up with their relationship building the more time they spend together, and the male and female pairs can have this lead into a romantic relationship, at which point they will have a child who is stored in the baby dimension. We'll get to that. Which child character it is based on the father. And notably, though, there are 2 same-sex options, one for men and one for women, in Fire Emblem Fates. Niles is a same-sex option for men, and Rajat is a same-sex option for women, which is the first time, I believe, that has been a thing in Fire Emblem ever. And they have luckily stuck to that and gotten a little bit better as time's gone on. The player takes on the role of Corrin, a prince/princess of the Kingdom of Nor, who has spent their entire life sheltered in a castle, often visited by their doting siblings, Xander, Camilla, Leo, and Elise. When they have finally come of age, their father, King Garen, sends them to investigate a fort on Nor's border with the Kingdom of Hoshido. This turns out to be a trap, and Corrin is almost killed. Corrin is found by members of the Hoshidan royalty, who recognize them as not a royal of Nor, but instead a royal of Hoshido, who had been kidnapped as a child many years prior. They meet not only their mother, Queen Mikoto, but also their biological Hoshidan siblings, Ryoma, Takumi, Hinoka, and Sakura. They also meet Azura, a girl who was supposedly kidnapped from Nor in retribution for Corrin's kidnapping, and raised by the Hoshidan royal family. When an assassination attempt results in the death of Queen Mikoto, the specter of war between Nor and Hoshido begins to loom over the land. When their 2 families clash on the battlefield, Corrin must make a choice. Do they side with their biological family in Hoshido, leading into the events of Birthright, side with their adopted family in Nor, leading to the events of Conquest, or side with neither, leading to the events of Revelation.
And settling Smash. It into... Yes, thank you. Yes, settling it in Smash. Absolutely.
So the questions become, can Corrin navigate their families through this war, hopefully with as few casualties as possible? What are the plans of the obviously sinister King Garen? And could there be a third party pulling the strings behind both Nor and Hoshido? This is where I'll ask, Peter, what are our experiences with Fire Emblem Fates?
This was at a time when I was, buying and collecting video games and whatnot, where I'm like, if I decide that I want to, sure, I'll get the nice special edition. And after enjoying Fire Emblem Awakening, I'm like, sure, Fire Emblem Fates has this really nice special edition where for $80, you can buy this limited special edition that both Birthright and Conquest come together on one cartridge, and I think it also comes with Revelation as well. But everything on one cartridge. And then I never put it in my 3DS. Of course, familiar with the characters and both sides of, whether it's, the family that raised you versus family by birth, who's it going to be? And, I still went up to my game collection, as we were preparing for this episode and pull it out. I'm like, yeah, I sure do have this, but I've never played it. So, granted, I think for as much as I did enjoy Fire Emblem Awakening, I should give Fire Emblem more of a shot. At this point, it's probably more like maybe prioritize Three Houses, or do I wait and maybe give Engage a shot this year? So I'm probably due for trying some more Fire Emblem. Unfortunately, Fates was just not it.
That, depending on your tastes, may or may not have been dodging a bullet. Like I said at the start of the segment, Fates is a rather divisive title in the Fire Emblem franchise. I have played all three routes. I played all three routes in very short succession. I don't recommend this. I was so burnt out on Fire Emblem by the end of it. And honestly, the farther away I get from it, the more I start to think about the problems. But I can't think about the problems with the story because I've already forgotten all of it. All of it. I don't think it's particularly interesting. I think it has some neat stuff that it could potentially explore, but that it doesn't. And I don't know. Corrin, I know a lot of people hate because they are the most... You hear about characters that everybody hates because they seem to just always be the best, and everybody treats them like they're the best, and they're the smartest, and they're the goodest, and they're the best. And that's Corrin. Everybody around Corrin is like, Corrin is the greatest, and we love them, and they're a genius, and they're amazing. And it's like you've known Corrin for 2 weeks. You don't know that. And it does get kind of annoying at a certain point that a lot of, especially the siblings, their personality appears to be they like Corrin. And that's the whole thing. Especially with one of the characters. We'll get to her.
I was going to say, cough, Sakura, cough.
Oh, not Sakura. I was talking about Sakura. Boy.
Well. It probably maybe the other one on the other side then.
Yep, that's the one. But anyways, this game actually has, I think, a kind of interesting bit of information behind it in terms of the development of it. So, as we have talked about before, as we talked about way back in that episode, when Awakening was in development, the plan was that it was going to be it. That was the last game in the franchise. They were assuming that this was the farewell tour, and the franchise was just going to die after that. And then Awakening sold like crazy worldwide and was a huge financial success. And so obviously, immediately, Nintendo got rid of those plans to scrap the franchise, and development on a new game was immediately greenlit. And the idea to have two sides to choose between was apparently inspired by the original Fire Emblem Shadow Dragon and the Blade of Light, which allowed the player to choose different protagonists. However, I guess at Shadow Dragon, this doesn't change the story at all, which something that Fates does because they wanted to sort of expand that concept. It changes the story entirely. The two kingdoms were, of course, based on two different aesthetics. Hoshido is based on feudal-era Japan, and Nor is based on medieval Europe, much like the rest of the Fire Emblem series. And the main theme for Hoshido was light and air, while the theme for Nor was darkness and stone. So I wonder which one is supposed to be the bad guy. It's a mystery. Birthright and Conquest were actually originally planned to be the only two routes, but the producer, Hitoshi Yamagami, insisted on having a third neutral route, and therefore, that's why Revelation is a thing. But the three routes made another problem arise, being that, hey, that's way too much for their in-house writers to do on their own. So they began looking into writers that usually worked in other mediums. And this led them to asking Shin Kobayashi, who in Japan is a famous writer who is well known for his work on various manga and TV shows. And they asked him, hey, can you write the general scenarios for each route? And according to him, he actually planned to refuse. He planned to turn them down. But then he played Awakening alongside his daughter, and they both really, really liked it. So he agreed to take the job. And his initial promise was 10 pages per scenario. But he apparently grew so fond of the characters in the game that he just kept writing, and in the end, the summary for Birthright is apparently approximately 500 pages long. With the summaries of Conquest and Revelations described as being able to fill 2 books. So he went a little further than the 10 pages.
And yet it's a little telling that there's so much lore there, apparently, and yet you can't remember any.
Yeah. Yeah, that sure is a thing, huh? In terms of gameplay, though, the main idea was to make Birthright the more beginner-friendly experience, Conquest the more challenging experience that catered to veteran players, and Revelation existing somewhere in between. They also had one other major thing that was an attempt to cater to beginners, which was Phoenix Mode, which was way too much, in my opinion. Basically, what Phoenix Mode was, so in casual, when a unit dies, they just go away for that map. They're not dead, but they're gone for that map. In Phoenix Mode, when a unit dies, they are immediately revived at full health. At that point, there is no video game.
Yeah, that's insane.
Like, at that point, just go watch it on YouTube. You'll have roughly the same experience. So, I don't think that one went ahead. I don't believe it's in 3 houses, at the very least. Which is good. That's way too much. So the biggest question with Fates is, why are they all separate versions that you have to buy separately? Well, according to the team, if they hadn't done it that way, they would have had to raise the price to what it would be if it had been a 2-game bundle, which they felt would be unfair to people who only wanted to play one route. To which I would say, then why did you explicitly write the story so that it only makes sense if you've played all 3 routes?
I think the real reason is because Pokemon did it.
Probably. Pretty much just money. That's the whole thing. But they also apparently decided to do this because in their view it had just become extremely easy to provide the other routes as DLC at a discounted price for those who had already bought one of them. Which has now caused a bit of a problem, or will in a couple of months, because Revelation is only available as DLC. That special edition that Peter mentioned, that's the only physical thing you can get with Revelation on it. And good luck getting that now.
Mm-hmm.
Which means when the 3DS shop goes down, Revelation disappears forever. Oops.
Thanks, game archiving efforts.
Woo! Thanks, thing that Nintendo actively fights actively all the time. There were also, as is usually the case with games like Fire Emblem, localization changes that made some of the worst people mad, even though a couple of them make sense. For instance, there is a support conversation between Corrin and the character Soleil that was apparently very heavily compared to gay conversion therapy. For people that don't know, Soleil is like openly, man, I'd like some of them women, please. She is gay as hell. It's like her entire character is that she likes pretty girls. That's the whole thing. But male Corrin's got to be able to marry her.
Oh.
At least I think it's with Corrin. I don't know for sure because all the Wikipedia article says is with someone and Soleil. So, but they also removed a feature, being that in the Japanese version of Fire Emblem Fates, you can do Pokemon-ame with the characters.
You know, I'm not sure we mentioned Pokemon-ame all that much when we talked about Pokemon X and Y recently, and maybe that was for the best.
See, Pokemon-ame in Pokemon X and Y made sense in that game because Pokemon are cute, lovable animals that you're supposed to be friends with. And basically what it was is you could go into this close-up 3D perspective with your Pokemon and you could pet them and interact with them and do all that. And they decided they wanted to do that with the people in Fire Emblem.
No! Bad.
This was weird and creepy, and they took it out of the American version.
Well, good.
But they did keep one of my favorite things specifically because it featured in a ProZD skit when the game came out, which I believe is one of the first skits I ever saw of him.
Yeah. Uh-huh.
I think Fates is the reason I know who he is because of his Fates stuff. But sometimes when you marry, sometimes when you go into your house, your spouse will be waiting for you, and there's bits and pieces of the Pokemon-ame thing still in there. One of them is they just got out of the bath and they're steamy or something, and it's like blow on them. And ProZD has a video where he's looking at it and it says blow on your spouse, and he starts to do it. Did an alien write this? Like, who does that? What is that? It's weird. It's really, really weird. And honestly, the game is fine without the Pokemon-ame. There's plenty of other creepy crap they couldn't take out, such as the ability to marry your siblings. Anyways, this of course caused controversy among dumb people who did the usual cries of censorship and stuff. They sent various complaints to Nintendo, and one group even planned to make their own fan translation / fan dub that was, quote unquote, more faithful according to them. And of course that got canceled as soon as the games came out here, because then they just went and bought the damn games. Like it always happens. Though it should be noted, though, there are actually some bad localization decisions, such as removing the option to play with Japanese voiceover. There's also one support between two characters in Revelation that is completely ruined in order to make a joke. There are two ninjas on each side, and I don't remember the guy's name, but the girl's name is Kagero. And in their first support in English, it's really funny because they're both stoic characters, so neither of them talk. It's just ellipses from both of them back and forth like 6 times. And I thought that was very funny, until I found out that in Japanese, that's not what it is. They actually talk about their history and how they kind of have a shared connection in like the history of ninjas. And then the second support in the English version they talk as if they had the conversation that was supposed to happen in the first support.
Oh.
And that is a bad localization decision. Like, straight up. But the game did review incredibly well upon release. All 3 versions together have an 88 on Metacritic. However, as I've mentioned a couple of times, older fans of the series disagreed with this take. Fates is incredibly divisive, and this only served to disappoint those older fans more when most of the main cast essentially went on to become the face of Fire Emblem for the next few years, especially Camilla. And if you don't know why, just go look up Camilla with Safe Search on.
Yeah, did she become the face of the franchise or the chest of the franchise?
Yes. In games like Fire Emblem Heroes and Fire Emblem Warriors, where Fate's characters are heavily represented. They're just all over. Nowadays, Three Houses has kind of eclipsed Fates, which is probably for the best. Three Houses has a lot better characters. So, there's that. And as of December 2019, according to Nintendo, Fates has sold a combined 3 million copies. So it still did sell well. Of course, Corrin would be added as a DLC character in Super Smash Bros. For 3DS and Wii U, and they would return in Super Smash Bros. Ultimate. And much of the main cast of Fates, like I said, appears in Fire Emblem Warriors.
Always weird with Corrin being revealed for Smash Brothers, Wii U and 3DS, because at the time it was after the Japanese release, but before the American release, when it was the DLC release. Yeah, so it was just like, okay, we're going to take this character at its word. That's, Sakurai, of course, loves Fire Emblem, and that was an interesting time.
Yeah, it sure was. And hey, they're a really, really cool character in Smash. Like, they're a lot of fun to play as, and it's basically the only place I know of where people like Corrin. Because they sure don't like them in their game. The composer I wanted to focus on is a man by the name of Hiroki Morishita. But all the info I could find on him was that he is one of the in-house composers at Intelligent Systems. He started there around 2009, and he is still there. That's it. In terms of discography, he has worked on WarioWare DIY and Game & Wario. WarioWare DIY, I believe, being his first game for the company. He also has done work on pretty much every Fire Emblem since he got there, starting with New Mystery of the Emblem. He then worked on Awakening, Fates, Heroes, Shadows of Valentia, Three Houses, and I assume he also worked on Engage.
Probably, yeah.
In terms of Paper Mario, he's also worked on pretty much all of those since he got there, being Sticker Star, Color Splash, and the Origami King. He worked on Codename Steam, and he also did 3 remixes in Super Smash Bros. Ultimate, being Gear Up 4 from Fire Emblem Heroes, Training Menu from Wii Fit U, and Darkman Stage from Mega Man 5. In terms of historical development research, Morishita was obviously not the only composer that worked on this game. Nintendo doesn't really do that anymore. A majority of the tracks were written by him and Takeru Kanazaki, whom we talked about in 150 for Three Houses. But other tracks were done by Rei Kondo, who we talked about for Awakening, Yasuhisa Baba, and Masato Koda, who we talked about for OSC 155 for his work on Devil May Cry. And then Yuka Tsuchioka, who is a long-standing Fire Emblem composer, who we talked about in episode 31 for their work on The Thousand Year Door, served as a supervisor for the music team for this game, which I believe seems to be what they have been doing ever since. They haven't really been the composer for a while.
Mm-hmm.
Morishita and Kanazaki apparently work together so often that they have a nickname. They are the Cavalier Duo.
Oh, that sounds familiar from the Kanazaki research. Aren't they like red and green Cavaliers?
Yeah, Morishita is red. I know that.
Okay, that does sound familiar, yeah.
And at least at the time, I don't know if this is still true, the official soundtrack release for Fire Emblem Fates came on 8 discs, which apparently made it one of the biggest game soundtrack releases ever. I don't know if that's been broken. I assume it has, but I don't know for sure. Anyways, it's time to get into the music. Let's hear some of the music, because one thing that I don't think anybody is going to disagree with is that the music of Fire Emblem Fates is fantastic. Just across the board. And of course, we have to start the Critical 5 with basically the main theme of Fire Emblem Fates. This is Critical Track number 1, Lost in Thoughts All Alone.
Sing with me a song of birthrights and love. The light scatters to the sky above. Dawn breaks through the gloom, white as a bow, lost in thoughts all alone.
This song was composed by Hiroki Morishita. He wrote the lyrics alongside the game's director Kohei Maeda. The English lyrics were adapted by Audrey Drake. Japanese vocals are by Renka, and the English vocals, which you heard in the clip, were done by Rena Strober. This is essentially Azura's song. The first time you see Azura, she is singing this song. Fun note, while Renka only provides Azura's singing voice in Japanese, her speaking voice is provided by a voice actress by the name of Lynn. No, not that one.
It's got 2 ends.
two ends, not the one end. It's not the one we would hope. Her English speaking and singing voice are both provided by Rena Strober. So, there you go. And according to the music team, they immediately knew that Renka was the one who should sing the song, because when they listened to their audition, according to Wikipedia, quote, several among them cried when they first heard her performance. Sure. This song actually, though, the Japanese version was apparently released as Renka's debut single. So Fire Emblem literally started her career. She has released other singles since, but apparently this specific song is what kicked the whole thing off, which is really neat. The song itself is good, though the English lyrics are a little bit stilted, but I don't think that's entirely on the localization, because the Japanese lyrics also sound like they're kind of stilted and shoved into a melody they don't fit in. It's really weird. I don't think it ruins the song, but it is definitely off-putting the first time you hear it.
I agree with that. But at least I think it's, while, you do get to hear the song plenty of times, I think it's more effective as an instrumental, or at least adapted to use its leitmotif in different songs throughout the game. So at least it kind of carries a melodic kind of theme throughout the game.
I think I agree. It fits a lot better as an instrumental piece, which is basically how it was brought into Smash, which it's a crime that this is the only song from Fates that was put in Smash.
Absolutely.
Like, it's an absolute travesty that is the case. But, I mean, this song is extremely important to the games. Like you said, the leitmotif of this song's melody shows up everywhere on this soundtrack, essentially. It's very notable. But my personal favorite song in the game, and one of the first songs I heard and thought, oh, so this game has a really, really good soundtrack, is Critical Track number 2. This is Dusk Falls. This song was once again composed by Hiroki Morishita, and it is one of the first map themes you hear. It is the theme that plays on the map where Corrin is going to investigate the Hoshidan fort, and it plays in a couple other places in the game, I think more often in Birthright than in Conquest. It's the best map theme in the game. People can come at me if they want, I'll die on this hill. This is the song I think about when I think about Fire Emblem Fates. It should be in Smash. It is not. There's a My Castle thing where you basically, between missions, that's where you can go and like buy weapons and talk to your units and all that. And you can choose what music plays while you're there. And guess what song I picked to play when I'm there? This one. I love this song. This piece is fantastic. And it's just the best map theme in Fates.
I agree. Out of the ones that I've heard, this is the one that's stuck out, just as far as listening to video game music over the years. Though I like the more intense version that plays in the battle scene transitions, though I've got a feeling we may also hear that later.
That feeling may turn out to be correct. Critical Attack number 3, the next two are kind of, I refer to them as boss themes, but they're more just, this is the battle theme that plays when you're up against the royals from the other kingdom. The first one being Critical Attack number 3, Rage in the Light. This is the one song on the entire list that is not composed by Morishita, this one being composed by Rei Kondo.
Which, yeah, if it sounds like it's from Okami,
Yeah,
that sure checks out, yeah.
it sure does. This one has a Japanese flair to it because it is the music for a fight against one of the Hoshidan siblings. And this one's not my favorite, but seeing as it is supposed to represent, like, 4 very important characters in the plot, I figured it should be here. It fits, and, I mean, I don't think it's bad. It's just not my favorite of the 2 boss themes, you know?
Yeah, definitely not bad in the slightest, but very different than what I think a lot of the rest of the music is. But you're absolutely right when you're talking about light and air and feudal Japan. Like, you have to have the music kind of capture this sound, and I think Kondo does a really good job with that.
The other boss theme, for if you're fighting one of the Norian royals, is Critical Track number 4, Condemnation. Once again composed by Hiroki Morishita. This is the better one. Just because it's like this crazy violin piece that is just moving a mile a minute, and it sounds super cool, and I think still kind of captures that medieval feeling to it a little bit. I don't know, I really like the song just because of the energy. The energy itself alone is just really, really cool and fun and good.
And I think it's in 6/8, so we're not getting the creepy 3/4 waltz, but you definitely have the energy and vibe there. Am I totally out of pocket to think like it's almost got like a bagpipe vibe in it as well?
I was gonna compare it to something that sounded kind of Scottish. So no, I don't think you are.
So maybe there's the European influence. I don't know if they're trying to channel that instrument specifically, but there's a timbre there that I feel like is trying to hearken to it.
I agree with that, because that's definitely what I think about when I hear this song most of the time. And critical track number 5 is End of All Below. This was once again composed by Hiroki Morishita. This is the final map of Revelation, which is the only other map theme that is on this list, sorry.
It's a video game track that may disappear with time.
This song may be impossible to legally hear very soon. Oh god, Nintendo, why? But it is, I think, fantastic. Of course, it brings back all of the leitmotifs of Lost in Thoughts All Alone. You have in the clip this like really, really cool piano part that I think really adds something to it. The intro is a weird vocal piece of Lost in Thoughts All Alone, but I think it fits super well in just the entrance and build up into the whole map, because this one has 3 entire routes of baggage attached to it. So it better be really good, and I think they mainly succeed on this song. I think it's very cool.
Yeah, if it's the id purpose, comparing it to the Fire Emblem Awakening track of the last map, then you've got a lot going in this piece. Tough to pick a 30-second clip. Definitely much going on. Yeah, you do hear the return of the Lost in Thoughts All Alone leitmotif with the trumpet at the end of the clip. The piano part is really cool. And there's just, waves of epic and then bringing it down to kind of a more intimate and then swells back. So a lot going on here, I think, fitting to kind of tie all of the routes together.
For songs on the cutting room floor, you mentioned that maybe we would talk about the battle version of Dusk Falls, and you were correct, because the first track on the cutting room floor for me is Dusk Falls Fire. Now you might be asking yourself, why would you waste a slot of cutting room floor for just the same version of a song? Because this version's really good. And I get to put together the list, so I think I agree that I like this version overall better. I just think for the Critical 5 itself, it kind of fit better for the map theme to be up there, if that makes sense. But I needed to give a shout out to the battle version of this song because it is so good.
Totally. And it's nice to hear the difference between the two. You hear the more intense strings and the drums that kind of come in, give the grander stakes, the big swells. I just think that this is a shame not to be in Super Smash Brothers. Like, it's got to be this one if you're going to add one more track from this game. And yeah, what a shame.
Yeah, it's an actual crime, and I'm going to arrest Masahiro Sakurai for it. The other track on the cutting room floor is actually a song that is not in the game. Now, I said Dusk Falls is my favorite song in the game. This is actually my favorite song on the soundtrack because it is a bonus track, but I had to give it a shout out. This is Enishi for Sakura and Elise. According to the internet, apparently Enishi means fate, which would make sense. The game's called Fire Emblem Fates. Like I said, this song is not actually in The game is included as a bonus track on the official soundtrack release, and it is a koto violin duet because Sakura plays the koto and Elise plays the violin. And in their support in Revelation, they talk about how we should definitely play together sometime because they hit it off really well, being the youngest siblings, quote unquote, each of them. And this song is gorgeous. It is such a beautiful piece. I wish it was in the game so I could have put it on the Critical 5, but obviously, being a bonus track, there's no way to justify putting it up there. But this is my favorite song on the soundtrack. I just think it is absolutely gorgeous and super well done, and a pairing you don't hear very often.
Yeah, what a nice piece. This is really pleasant to listen to, and I didn't know I had that connection to a conversation that goes on in the game. It's a nice idea. More official releases should do things like this.
So what will I never forget about Fire Emblem Fates? Look, if I'm going to be honest, it's Camilla, because Nintendo won't let me forget her. Or at least for a while would not. I think they've toned down the Camilla saturation since Three Houses came out. And they've been able to throw other girls up there as well. But she was just everywhere. Everywhere in Fire Emblem. And she was one of the most popular characters in the game. Again, can't imagine why. But other than that, I don't know. I'm really glad they kind of didn't release Three Houses as 3 separate games.
Mm-hmm.
That would have sucked. But also, I'm really glad it sounds like Engage is not a game with different routes. It's just a game with a story that you play through, because it turns out playing multiple routes of a Fire Emblem game actually might be too much Fire Emblem, even if the game is good. And for a lot of people, this game was not considered to be very good. But overall, I mean, I like the character designs in general, even though some of them are incredibly stupid. Such as, I don't remember her name, but she's a barbarian girl that's wearing a bikini armor thing. And she's got the curly blonde hair, and her entire character is, I'm the worst person in the world, but I'm gonna pretend to be super nice whenever I meet a rich prince because mommy needs a sugar daddy. And that's weird. It's all stuff like that. The characters are all absolutely bizarre, and at least a couple of them at least are memorable, even if some of them are memorable for the wrong reasons. But overall, I mean, it's a game that I played one time, and I'll have to play Revelation again one day, because it's Corin's game for Smash Pieces.
Oh, good luck with that. This is my reminder to myself that I need to put this game into my 3DS just to make sure that I can access all of it before before it all goes down and goes away.
Is this the first game we've talked about that is very soon disappearing forever?
I feel like with the possible immediacy of it, I mean, there have been games, of course, where it's I don't know where you'd access this game now, but yeah, with the upcoming nature of it, yeah,
Yeah, because I think the closest is Scott Pilgrim vs. the World, which we did because it was coming back out, finally.
Oh, right, yep.
If you want to play Fire Emblem Revelation, for whatever reason, buy it now, I guess. Figure out a way. Good luck. Maybe Nintendo will see fit to re-release them on Switch. I could see them doing that. These games made a lot of money. But who knows at this point?
Was this character you were mentioning Rinka?
No, it's not Rinka. I want to say it was Charlotte. Is that her? Yes, it is Charlotte.
Okay.
Oh, boy, howdy. She sure has a design. All right. So, to transition into our next game, we like to highlight a fan cover, fan remix. There was no other option for me than the English cover back before the game came out in English, by the way. So this is a fan translation version, which at least used to be. I don't know if it still is, like, this person's specialty, this person being Amelie, now famous VTuber. That's not a joke. But she did a cover of Lost in Thoughts All Alone, which is fantastic, and in a lot of ways I think is better than the official version, especially when it gets into the Conquest section of the song, which is what the clip is going to play. So I hope you all enjoy that, and we will be right back.
Join in the tale, in the blight of conquest and lies. Come the sun to tarnish in the sky. Vow that we shall tear the light. Dark sees the throne, lost in thoughts all alone.
From a game with at least 2 perspectives comes another game with that same sort of thing going for it. Let's talk about The Last of Us Part 2. And even though this game came out 2.5 years ago, we'll still be relatively light on spoilers. I mean, we can't ignore the premise of the game, and I don't think if you are a fan of games, you can ignore that either. If you've stayed away from that, well, kudos to you. But we'll still keep it generally vague for those that are looking to still play this game. It isn't the first time we've talked about The Last of Us. Of course, we talked about the original game on episode 13 of Original Soundchat, where we talked about composer Gustavo Santaolalla. The Last of Us Part 2 released worldwide on June 19th, 2020 for PlayStation 4. That's like one of the shortest sections of that we've had in quite some time, because to this day, that's the only place you can play it. Of course, I guess you can also play it on PlayStation 5 if you bring your disc over. So there's that, I suppose. The game was developed by Naughty Dog and published by Sony Interactive Entertainment. The Last of Us Part 2 is a third-person action-adventure game with stealth and survival horror elements. Much like the original game, you're traversing post-apocalyptic environments, you're using weapons to defend yourself against hostile humans and cannibalistic creatures infected by a mutated strain of the cordyceps fungus. You collect materials throughout the environments to upgrade your abilities through a skill tree, or you can improve the parts of your weapons. What is the story for The Last of Us Part 2? Well, again, for as much as we can say about the beginning of the game, the opening premise, so 4 years after the end of the first game, with Joel taking Ellie from the Fireflies and stopping the creation of a possible infected antidote at the cost of Ellie's life, Ellie and Joel have now ingrained themselves in a community in Jackson, Wyoming, with Joel's brother Tommy, though their father-daughter-like relationship seems a bit strained at the beginning of the game. While on a usual patrol, Joel and Tommy rescue a stranger named Abby from an infected horde, and they all return to an outpost being used as a temporary hideout by Abby's group. And these are all made up of former Fireflies, now part of the Washington Liberation Front, or the WLF. This is a militia group based in Seattle, Washington. The group attacks Joel and Tommy while their guard is down, as Abby conveniently happens to have been on a years-long quest to seek revenge against Joel Miller for some yet-to-be-revealed reason. While Ellie is on a mission to rescue the two brothers after they don't return, she enters the WLF, or Wolf, camp to witness Abby beat Joel to death. Ellie's hatred and desire for revenge burns deeply against Abby and the Wolves, taking her out to Seattle But where will this journey end? Why did Abby want revenge against Joel? What's the deal with the Seraphites, a religious cult in conflict with the wolves? And this is a struggle that Ellie also finds herself in the middle of. Essentially, can Ellie just find peace? Joe, here's where I'll ask you, what are our experiences with The Last of Us Part 2?
I watched my roommate play it. I famously was not a huge fan of playing The Last of Us. It's just not my thing. I don't know why. Just didn't have a good time playing it. But I was fine watching it, and I was fine sitting down to watch the game being played by my roommate. He didn't really like it, and I wasn't a huge fan of the story, but, whatever. I do really like the music, and we've talked about the composer before, and I'm very interested in hearing about the development of the game at the very least, because I think that probably should have some interesting stuff connected to it, and I'm just excited to hear the soundtrack, because these games have some good damn soundtracks.
They sure do. They sure do. The Last of Us Part 2 was my game of the year in 2020. It's been an interesting game to look back on. I think I will want to play it again eventually. So I got Part 1 for Christmas because I didn't jump on getting that in September of 2022. And I'm like, you know what? Maybe when I'll watch the HBO show, I'll be interested to play Last of Us again. And maybe I'll go through both games on PS5. Because going through that game, Part 2, on launch week was a rush. It was a ride. It was longer than I think, many of us expected. There's kind of an ending section of the game that feels a little excessive, but that's neither here nor there. It is a game that I'm so sick and tired of hearing about the discourse, because it is a kind of focal point of, as you kind of mentioned before a little bit in Fire Emblem Fates, the worst folk online to start bringing up their ideas on how things should be different. I think it's a bold storytelling strategy for this game and how it goes about telling its story. It takes a big risk that, again, we can keep generally vague on, but if you play the game, you are aware of what we're referring to. But I think it's overall successful. And I think what was especially impressive was the gameplay and how much it improved from the original The Last of Us, and the animations, and just how good it feels to play. There are things that we'll get into in the discussion of the development where it's like that feels a little maybe superfluous and maybe made too big of a deal of, but overall the game feels great to play, and it is a wallop of a narrative for sure. And yeah, you're right, the music really stands out, though I feel like in this game in particular, it's really about not standing out too much, picking its moments, having the music be very effective in those right spots. And then you have especially effective musical moments that, again, we'll get into. It's all part of the story. So the development of The Last of Us Part 2 begins near the end of development of The Last of Us in 2013, where early story concepts were kind of put together and formulated. Naughty Dog began development in 2014, just after they released the remastered version of The Last of Us for PS4. And they're doing all this pre-production, but by August 2017, after the release of Uncharted: The Lost Legacy, the entire 350-person team at Naughty Dog shifted to develop The Last of Us Part 2. In total, when you start getting all hands on deck across PlayStation's worldwide studios, approximately 2,169 developers across 14 studios worked on the game, and it shows. Game director and writer Neil Druckmann said that whereas The Last of Us is about the extreme measures one would take for love, Part 2 is more about how far one would go to bring justice for those they love. He wanted the player to feel a thirst for revenge before making them realize the reality of their actions. I feel like overall it's more effective than Hideo Kojima talking about words and deeds with quiet Metal Gear Solid 5. Druckmann also said that the other themes include tribalism, trauma, and the pursuit of justice. Interesting to learn that The Last of Us Part 2 was originally planned as an open world game with hub worlds, but later the game transferred to a more linear style as, honestly, yeah, it would better serve the narrative. You don't want Ellie going off to some place and then you don't have the next beat of the story laid out just so. The game pushed the PS4's technical limits, yet it still ran well at launch, which I think when you hear about a lot of these games and how it kind of runs poorly, especially when it's pushing those boundaries. The Last of Us Part 2, from what I played early on from launch, I did not run into any issues like that, especially because there are bigger environments, there are more enemies, there's better AI. There was a point that the enemies would even shout out first names of some of the NPCs that you've killed. And it's a cute idea, but I think, that was kind of made too big of a deal of.
Yeah, I also think they do it just a little bit too much.
A little bit, yeah. They really want you to notice this change that they made. All of these impressive development stats, though, come at the cost of a reported crunch culture of 12-hour days. Whether it was a large staff turnover after 2016's Uncharted 4, an insufficient amount of employees, or the onset of the COVID-19 pandemic in the final days of development, finishing the game was a troubled process. But that didn't stop it from being revealed rather early on, honestly, because it was initially revealed at the PlayStation Experience event in December 2016. Great trailer. Honestly, one of ones that I don't think I'll ever forget. The first gameplay was shown at E3 2018, notably one of if not PlayStation's very last E3 events, the one that they showed the 4 big games there, and that was a heck of a gameplay reveal as well.
Is that the one where they had to corral all the journalists into another building after the Last of Us section?
Yeah, because they put them in the barn where they're having the dance, and everyone's like, "Why are we here?" And then the game opens up, and that's where the scene is taking place. It makes sense, but then they got to shuttle everyone over, and
that took 15 minutes.
Way too long. During a State of Play presentation in September 2019. February 21st, 2020 was announced as the game's release date. Though about a month after this announcement, the date was pushed to May 29th. You gotta have that Naughty Dog polish. And then at the beginning of April 2020, the release was delayed indefinitely because of the pandemic, especially when you have an outbreak and a post-apocalyptic environment. You don't want to be messing around too much with the PR of your game going up against a real-life pandemic. Honestly. In late April, though, a discourse firestorm happened with one of the biggest video game leaks of all time. Not only showing Joel's death, but also highlighting a Metal Gear Solid 2-like level of deceptive marketing with how the game would ultimately play out. In an attempt to steal headlines, Sony and Naughty Dog just happened to announce the final release date on the day of this leak, and they said, the game's coming out on June 19th. Let's have that happen when you Google The Last of Us Part 2 and hope that story comes up instead of a really ridiculous amount of video game leaking.
And those big leaks just seem to be more and more common nowadays. Because then I think the same year it also happened to Capcom.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
It's either that or it was the next year, and then what's the one that just got Nintendo has gotten 3, but what's the one that just happened recently? I don't remember. Somebody just had something happen recently. I don't remember who it was, but those are happening a lot more recently, which is a little bit alarming.
Yeah, and then it feels like Rockstar every now and then gets like thrown in that
Rockstar,
mix
that's
too.
the one. All of the GTA 6 stuff.
Oh,
came out.
yeah. That is the big one for sure. Yeah, of course. Yeah, you got the male and female playable characters. Yeah, it does seem to become a big thing, but after The Last of Us Part 2 one and the bold choices that are taken with the narrative there were a lot of people that were very, very unhappy about that, and it made for a tough time for the development team. Ultimately, when the game came out, holding even tighter to embargoes and things like that, the game reviewed exceptionally well with a Metacritic average of 93. Praise included its gameplay, audio design, score, the performances, the characters, the visual fidelity, and at the same time, its narrative and themes divided critics. It's a bold game on that regard, but a lot of people loved it. A lot of people, not so much. Though it was review bombed by users in the early days of the game's launch, so questionable if they even got to play all of it or even some of it, criticizing the characterization and the plot, while some complained of social justice warrior politics, with vitriolic responses to the game's LGBT characters.
Never change, gamers. And by that I mean change now.
Change forever. In its release weekend, The Last of Us Part 2 sold over 4 million copies worldwide, becoming the fastest-selling PlayStation 4 exclusive game. Recently, God of War Ragnarok sold 5.1 million copies recently, but that was across PlayStation 4 and PlayStation 5. So I guess TLU Part 2 still has that PS4 exclusive record. It sold over 10 million copies by June 2022, making it currently the 5th best-selling game all time on PlayStation 4. If you're wondering what's in front of it, The Witcher 3 is number 4, Uncharted 4 is number 3, God of War 2018 number 2, and Marvel's Spider-Man, the best-selling PlayStation 4 game. The Last of Us Part 2 holds the record for the most Game of the Year awards, surpassing previous record holder The Witcher 3 Wild Hunt from 2015. It was an awards darling, at least on the nomination front, because it's just nominated an obscene amount of times at these big game awards. Nominated 11 times at the Game Awards, winning 7, including Game of the Year. It was nominated 14 times at the BAFTAs, winning 3 with Animation, Performer in a Leading Role for Laura Bailey, and EE Game of the Year. And it was nominated 11 times at the DICE Awards, winning Outstanding Achievement in Story and Animation. What is the legacy of The Last of Us Part 2? Well, the game got updated to run at 60 frames per second on PlayStation 5, so if you go back and play the game on that platform, you'll have an enhanced experience. Then The Last of Us Part 1 launched in September 2022 for PlayStation 5. It used the foundations of Part 2's engine to remake the 2013 original game. The Last of Us Part 1 also launches on March 3rd on PC. Currently, Naughty Dog is working on a multiplayer game in the Last of Us universe. They haven't talked about a name, but some may think back to the original Last of Us game and think, Factions may work for a title, or is it Factions 2, or do they come up with a new title altogether? More information is supposedly coming later this year, as they confirmed just a couple weeks ago, actually. And more imminently, the HBO live-action series for The Last of Us premieres this Sunday, January 15th, with 9 episodes in its first season. One can imagine they're going to try to tell the entire first game story in that time period, but we'll have to see. Should be interesting. There's a lot of buzz around that with Neil Druckmann involved, as well as Craig Mazin, who is the showrunner of Chernobyl, and famously Ted Cruz's roommate from college who dunks on him.
Good.
As one should.
As is our God-given right.
As an American. The composer that we'll highlight for The Last of Us Part 2 is Mac Quayle. And Mac Quayle was born in Suffolk, Virginia, though he lived in different places around the state while growing up. He first discovered music at age 6 when he was part of his church's choir, and he would take piano and percussion lessons. During school, he served as a band member for 2 different bands, the Naros and the X-Raves. So Mac Quayle's music sounds a lot like drum and bass, so I wonder if he served as a drummer for these 2 bands, or maybe he did piano or keyboards, because Quayle would move to New York City to attend New York University, but he departed when his internship at a studio allowed him to make a living working as a keyboard player and programmer. He would eventually work as a programmer, remixer, and keyboardist, and he would work on over 300 song releases, 40 #1 Billboard dance hits, and he earned a Grammy nomination for producing Donna Summer's I Will Go With You. Mac Quayle has created music for Madonna, Whitney Houston, Beyoncé, Depeche Mode, Britney Spears, Elvis Presley, Annie Lennox, New Order, and Sting, to name a few. In 2004, he moved to Los Angeles, where he worked as an additional composer for the CBS crime drama Cold Case. He was introduced to film composer Cliff Martinez, which gave him opportunities to work in film. And this let his work be noticed by Ryan Murphy, who invited Quayle to audition to be the composer for the 4th season of American Horror Story. This partnership between Mac Quayle and Ryan Murphy would prove fruitful, and it would continue for many of Murphy's TV series projects going forward. One of the projects that was outside of Ryan Murphy, though, Mac Quayle is the composer for Mr. Robot. And his work on the first season of that TV show, Mac Quayle was awarded the Primetime Emmy Award for Outstanding Music Composition for a Series. You can follow Mac Quayle on Twitter at MacQuayle, how his name is spelled. For his discography, Mac Quayle composed additional music for Cold Case, and then he was the main composer for American Horror Story, American Crime Story, Mr. Robot, 911, 911 Lone Star, Pose, The Politician, and Ratched. For film, he was a music programmer for The Lincoln Lawyer and Drive. Oh my gosh, Drive, what an amazing soundtrack. And then he did additional music for Contagion, Stolen, Spring Breakers, and Only God Forgives. His game work involves additional music for Far Cry 4, and of course, The Last of Us Part 2. So with historical development research for The Last of Us Part 2 and its soundtrack, of course, Gustavo Santaolalla returned to compose and perform the game's score. With his amazing acoustic guitar and banjo work, it's really similar to what he had done for the first game, but Mac Quayle joined and contributed to the combat music to make it just darker, heavier, more percussive, and it's a really nice balance between the two, especially for the really dark revenge themes in this game. Not much else out there for the making of the music, but it's important to note that there were specific rights that were negotiated for the use of 2 songs in the game. And we'll get to mentioning those here with the 5 critical tracks for The Last of Us Part 2. I feel like we have to start with the aptly titled The Last of Us Part 2. As you might expect, for a track that is titled the same as the game, this is the main theme for The Last of Us Part 2. Obviously, a variation of the original theme from The Last of Us. And of course, it's composed by Gustavo Santaolalla. The banjo is a nice touch in this one, and it really kind of cuts through when the leitmotif gets used throughout different moments in the story. And it had to be mixed up a little bit, right? I mean, with Ellie taking center stage and having this revenge plot, you got to have it be a little different than, old Joel's seen some things and has got to take this girl across the country. It's a different story for sure. And so you got to kind of keep the same sort of theme going on, but put different twists on it. And it kind of feels a little bit offbeat and off kilter on the rhythm of the piece. And I think that's intentional, but very effective. And especially when it comes in certain parts in the story to represent the journey as a whole.
I kind of like this version better than the original, just a little bit. Obviously, the original Last of Us theme is a classic, like a Stone Cold classic, but
for sure,
I really, really dig this version specifically. You mentioned the banjo. I think the banjo is really, really well used in this song, and I dig its tone a lot.
Yeah, it just punctuates those key moments in cutscenes, and really, really works well there. As we explore complicated character relationships in the game, though, another piece from Gustavo Santaolalla that stands out is number 2 on the 5 critical tracks, and this one is Unbroken. Undeniably a Gustavo piece, right? With that solo acoustic guitar just kind of stretching out the chords. In the background, you hear the nice little mandolin going. But just, yeah, this is some powerful stuff for the score. And it plays at key moments throughout the game that highlight Ellie and Joel's complicated history and relationship. One that was pointed out was it plays as you're walking through Joel's house after his death, and you find his revolver there and you pick it up, and so many just kind of heart-wrenching moments. I remember that being just like you're in the shock, the aftermath of that big moment, and kind of giving the character a farewell in a way before Ellie goes on her quest for revenge, and just kind of giving those little moments. And this theme to kind of power it through and throughout the game as you kind of learn more about why their father-daughter-like relationship is a bit on the fritz. Yeah, this is a really good one. I mean, it's one where you're listening through the soundtrack, and as one who's played the game, like, yeah, this one has to be here. This is a powerful one for sure.
Yeah, I dig the really melancholy vibe of it. It's very low key. Like you mentioned, this game's soundtrack focuses a lot more on being environmental. I don't know if that's the correct term that I want to use.
Sure, yeah. I mean, I think during the main parts of gameplay, especially as you're exploring, it's all about the audio design and the sound of the world. Maybe some combat music spikes up if you're in an encounter there, but it's really about just delivering those powerful moments in the cutscenes that are kind of delivering the narrative. Yeah, it's picking its spots.
Yeah, I think this is a very good example of that. Of it's just completely low key, and it's there to do its job and not much else.
When we talk about Mac Quayle's contributions to the music for The Last of Us Part 2, we get in some combat music, and there's one that stands out in particular for a key moment of the game. This is critical track number 3, and this is The Cycle of Violence. certainly does sound different than the work of Gustavo Santaolalla, so Mac Quayle composed this one. This is a track that plays in a key confrontation of Ellie versus Abby. And wow, what a big moment in that game. Especially as you're trying to hide from your counterpart there. You're just hearing the tense nature and the dun 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 dun. Like you're just trying to tiptoe around, be very quiet and sneaky. But you definitely hear the different, distinct elements of, all right, well, we got to have heavy drums, dark strings, pulsing nature, just the tension really just ratchet up. And, not knowing Mac Quayle's work, yeah, would it have surprised me if it's like, oh, let's get the guy from American Horror Story and Mr. Robot in here? Like, that makes perfect sense now. Granted, a lot of other combat music would have worked well, but I think this is just a key moment in the story and a big boss encounter.
I'm trying to think of what this reminds me of. It reminds me of a different game. I mean, there's a lot of games that sort of sound like this, but there's one in particular that I'm thinking of, and I can't put my finger on what. The tension in this song is, I'm pretty sure I remember the moment this would play. I'm pretty sure. The tension fits that moment extremely well. And I don't know, I like songs like this where it's just, the tension is kind of all that's there because it's all that needs to be there.
Yes, yep.
And when that's done really well, like you can tell. And I think this is an example of that. I think it's good.
Just showing the stark difference between the nice acoustic guitar and then chun, 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 chun. Like it's a very crunchy difference. Last couple tracks here on the Critical 5 are key vocal themes. And one of these that stands out, especially in the early days of the game's marketing, number 4 here on the Critical 5 for The Last of Us Part 2 is Wayfaring Stranger.
I'm going there to see my mother. She said she'd meet me when I come. I'm just a going over Jordan. I'm just a going over home.
This is the credits theme. If you play on normal difficulty, performed by Ashley Johnson, who is the voice of Ellie. And this takes the old American folk song of The Wayfaring Stranger, and famously also performed by Johnny Cash, but adapts it for Ellie to be singing it and performing it. And this was performed at PlayStation Experience 2017, so the year after the reveal trailer for the game. I think I want to say it was also played at when The Last of Us did a one night live kind of performance where they performed some of the scenes from the original game on a stage. I want to say this might have also been played there, but this was a song that was definitely played and kind of attached to this game in the lead up to The Last of Us Part 2. So for it to appear as the credits theme, it didn't really show up in the game as far as I remember, but fitting for a credits theme for this game.
So weird thing, within a year, this is actually like one of 2 games that I played or saw that had Wayfaring Stranger as the credits theme. Maybe one day I'll talk about the other. It's an indie game called Welcome to Elk.
Huh, interesting.
Maybe one of these days I'll bring it. I think it's Swedish. I know about it because I did the review for NWR, but before that I met the developer at PAX and talked to her about the game, and it was very, very interesting. But it was kind of a weird moment when I got to the credits and Wayfaring Stranger was playing. It was like, all right, cool. Like within a year. Awesome. That's odd.
Well, when you don't have to negotiate rights for it because it's a folk song, I guess you can do whatever you want. The same can't be said for number 5 on their Critical 5, though. It was a song that had to be discussed with the original artist, and this track, of course, has to be here. This is Future Days.
If I ever were to lose you, I'd surely lose myself. Everything I found, dear, I've not found by myself. Try and sometimes you'll succeed to make this man of me. All my stolen missing parts I've no need for anymore.
So famously, Neil Druckmann heard this song by Pearl Jam and thought its lyrics fit super well with what he was planning for his upcoming game. So he went and talked to the band and got their blessing to use their song in this game. Made it work too, where it's like the timeline works out that before the big outbreak day in the Last of Us universe, it was reasonable that Joel would have heard this song by Pearl Jam, and so that's why he knows it. So this song ends up being the main motif overall for the game, and also just the lyrical theme of if I ever were to lose you, I'd surely lose myself. This take on the song is performed by Troy Baker, the actor who plays Joel. And this song just also works out not only because it's the first song that we hear Joel perform for Ellie after promising that he'd sing for her in the last game, but also ties into the ending of the game. So Future Days, super important song overall. Could have played the original Pearl Jam song, I guess, but it's, I think, more effective to use this cover from Troy Baker, whereas you hear this full cover in the credits if you beat the game on grounded mode. Fun fact, if you beat The Last of Us Part 2 on the permadeath mode, which was a game mode that was added in a later update, you hear Ashley Johnson as Ellie sing a full cover of Through the Valley, which was the song that she was singing in the game's PSX 2016 reveal trailer. So there are all sorts of ways to hear all of these vocal songs. It just depends on how you beat the game.
All I can think about when I hear this song is John Reardon over at NWR. Like, he's one of the ones that went on, like, random, like, here's what I don't like about this song being in the game. And like, it doesn't make sense. Just jokingly, of course, but like, that's all I can think about when I hear this song. It has ruined it for me. It's a very good cover, but all I can think about is John Reardon. Sorry, John.
I suppose that would be a way to color your experience with it. Couple tracks on the cutting room floor. I've got 2 here, and this first one is called Longing. Another musical theme from Gustavo Santaolalla, where when you hear this on the soundtrack, you're like, oh, yep, this brings back memories of his score for sure. In particular, it plays, I would say, kind of as the main theme for the back half of the game, let's say. Say no more. Key character moments there. So in a way, it's a different kind of theme and a counterpoint in a way to Unbroken, but still a very notable melodic progression and leitmotif nonetheless. And I think fitting here on the cutting room floor.
For some reason, the tone and feeling of this song sort of reminds me of Silent Hill 2-ish stuff. Like, obviously, it's not exactly the same, Santaolalla, and Yamaoka have very, very different composition styles. But I don't know, for some reason that's the first thing that comes to mind with something of this sort of emotion, if that makes sense.
Yeah, there's a kind of hollowness and emptiness to this, I think. And I feel like that is especially fitting, especially when it plays. You're just trying to look to get back to normal. Not only was Pearl Jam's Future Days a song that had to have its rights negotiated, the other track is here on the cutting room floor. And when else would be a good time to mention Take On Me?
Take me on. I'll be gone in a day or two.
I know it's not the classic from Aha, but it's just a really nice, simple cover, of course, performed by Ashley Johnson as Ellie. And it's just a really sweet cover that happens in a moment that is really easy to miss. See, early on in Ellie's exploration for revenge, you go to Seattle to learn more about the Washington Liberation Front, and it kind of becomes this semi-open world, kind of like what they tried to do in a little bit with Uncharted: The Lost Legacy and the open environment there. But you can explore Seattle and explore its buildings, and you can find some good upgrades there if you take the time. You don't have to explore all of it. There's a simple golden path. You don't have to spend too much time there. But if you take your time, you can stumble upon a moment with an acoustic guitar just lying there on an upper floor in one of the buildings. And Ellie and her companion Dina sit down, and Ellie plays this for her. And it's a really sweet moment. Just really cute to have such a classic song in there. And of course, rights negotiated. Interesting also with the guitar minigame, how you can essentially play whatever you like with the way they kind of construct that minigame. And there was a run of YouTube channels for a while where it's like, watch me play this on The Last of Us Part 2 guitar.
I actually forgot about that. That I remember now. That was cool. That was a cool, bit of time on the internet.
Yeah, super interesting. But just a nice moment that not everyone experienced when they played through The Last of Us Part 2.
So, we mentioned Future Days, ruined by John Reardon for me. It's funny that you mentioned Kojima in Words and Deeds earlier, because I can never hear Take On Me in any version ever without remembering how it was my song for my helicopter in Phantom Pain.
Oh, I'm so glad you've mentioned this.
And it was really, really, for some reason, it was really funny to me every time it came in. And that's all I can think of anytime this song comes on, ever.
I'm so glad you brought this up, because my helicopter song, my Pequod song, was Hall & Oates' Maneater.
I think that was one of mine for a while too. That and Kids of America.
Oh, that's funny. Yeah. Oh man, what a good way to bring that up. Oh yeah. But just a very different adaptation of this classic Aha song, and fitting to be here, I think, on the cutting room floor for such a fleeting moment. So what will I never forget about The Last of Us Part 2? Obviously a game I want to go back and replay. I think it takes a lot of bold decisions and choices when it comes to the narrative and its structure. It's a decision that worked for me. I can understand why you may have had people put the controller down, and whether or not they return to it, that's fine. But I think if you persevere, it can prove effective. A lot of things in this game, I think, are frivolous complaints, whether it comes to the depiction of Abby or a character like Lev. I think, yeah, there are some small things that you could say, oh, well, this could have been done a little better. And I'll give you that. But that shouldn't exist at all. That doesn't make sense at all. Stop. There's the discourse with The Last of Us Part 2 is so exhausting. And honestly, I'm sick of it. I really enjoyed my time with the game. And I think when I return to it, I will enjoy it even more now that I know it's coming. Key moments like the museum. So good. So good, the museum. So I look forward to giving this game another playthrough.
Now that you mention, I know it's really weird for me to say this after literally like 5 minutes saying that I forgot about it, but the guitar stuff. People doing the music on the guitar. I think that was just, I love it when games have a small thing like that and people go wild with it. I think it's a lot of fun. And so I think that's the best part on my end.
Mm-hmm. And designed so well, too, to shift between the keys and you can pluck on the touch screen. Just, yeah, really neat stuff there. 2 sides to every story with Fire Emblem Fates and The Last of Us Part 2. I don't think we meant to have the games work out so well with a theme like that, but you know what? It sure does turn out, especially when we have a very specific theme for next week. So that will do it for us this week on Original Soundchat. You can find me on Twitter at PeteSpeakEasy. Joe is over at StringPixel. The video version of the show is on the Rhymes with Asia YouTube channel, but it's that MP3 podcast version that you want. That's hosted by Anonymous Dinosaur at anondino.squarespace.com. That's where Joe's other podcast, Smasherpieces, is hosted, and you can find Smasherpieces and Original Soundchat wherever you get your podcasts. Catchers all around the globe, from Apple Podcasts to Google Podcasts, even on Spotify, where we have a feed of podcast episodes, but also a big Spotify playlist, where if we talk about a video game track on this show and it's on Spotify, it gets added to this big monster playlist. Joe, what's being added this week?
Last of Us Part 2 is the only thing that is on Spotify. Obviously, Fire Emblem being a first-party Nintendo title, you can't get it much like Revelation in a few months. You can't get it anywhere.
Oh, no. That's so depressing. Figure that out, Nintendo. Come on. When you're done listening, you can find the show on social media at Soundchat OST. Leave some feedback for us. How are we doing with these episodes? What did we miss on our Critical Fives? And give us some suggestions for games to cover in the future. All right, Joe, who are we talking about next week on that themed week?
Well, in that themed week that I am very excited because I've wanted to talk about this game ever since I played it at the start of last year, I'll be talking about Gota Masuoka.
And I will be talking about Ryota Kozuka, another game that we are both, I think, looking forward to talking about. All right, to play us out, to highlight a fan cover, a fan remix, whether it's on YouTube, OC Remix, wherever, found a cover of the main theme of The Last of Us Part 2 by Goose Music, Guus space music, on YouTube. And it's just a really nice acoustic guitar cover of this distorted theme from the original Last of Us theme. It's a really nice take on it. Thank you so much for listening this week on Original Soundchat. We'll see you next time. Take care.